Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the next edition of Independent Outlook. I'm Graham Walker, and we're coming to you today from the Independent Outlook here in Oakland, California, almost in the shadow of San Francisco across the bay. And our aim is to give you a somewhat independent perspective on the events of the day. Today, we're going to be talking about the complicated election endgame, and then we're going to talk about some of the social media, I kind of call it imperialism on the same subject, talking about the possible Biden administration, senior appointees, and much else. So thanks for joining us. Today we have with us, as usual, our president and founder, David Theroux, who founded the Independent Institute some 34 years ago. Hey, David.
Hi.
It's great to have you, as usual. And of course, also Bill Evers, Williamson Evers, who is the director of our Center on Educational Excellence. Thank you for joining us, Bill.
Thank you.
So I am looking at the daily news, and it's hard for a layman to sort through some of this election endgame stuff because there's a lot of complicated things going on. Some of them seem more significant than others. Let me just toss a thought out on the table first, and then maybe David and then Bill can pick up on this a little bit with some details. But I'm looking at my own copy of the U.S. Constitution, which I keep in my pocket, and not always, but a lot of the time. And in Article 2, Section 1, it says, and I think this is the heart of some of the most important lawsuits that seem to be underway affecting the election. It says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, namely presidential electors, etc. So Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution specifies that the state legislatures may determine the manner in which such electors are selected and put into place. And the electors are scheduled to vote on the 14th next week in their respective states. But a lot of the litigation seems to hang on whether or not that specification in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution is very specific and literal or kind of flexible and living. David, can you comment on that and some of these other electoral litigation matters?
The Constitution is a short document, and there is very little leeway to misinterpret the words of Article 2, Section 1, Clauses 2 and 3. It's very specific about how the electors are determined and who has the responsibility for doing that, which is state legislatures, not governors, not mayors, not attorney generals, not the janitor. It is essentially the state legislators. And if that's not complied with, then the electors are illegitimate. And that's essentially part of the motivation of the state of Texas lawsuit against 4 other states, the 4 other states being Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Since they filed that, which I believe was yesterday, there are now 8 more states that have joined in, including Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, South Carolina, South Dakota, and Arkansas.
Wow,
and
that's way more than yesterday.
Right, so it'll be probably more, I suspect. Their case is primarily twofold. The first being non-compliance with Article 2, Section 1, sorry.
The part I read a moment ago.
Right, the 2 clauses
Mm-hmm.
2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part is the equal protection from the 14th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of different aspects of that they go into in their court filing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're asking for a number of things in the process, which essentially boils down to the selection of electors by those states, since they're not in compliance, is illegitimate
Mm-hmm.
and cannot be accepted. And either new electors have to be selected, or a number of other procedures to be pursued to have presidential electors in compliance with the constitutional provision. I mean, the state governments are given the opportunity to set the standards and practices for election, national elections. as well as state elections.
So now,
But
just for
this
clarity,
is one clear part of it that is selecting presidential electors that the Constitution is unquestionably clear on.
Just to be clear, usually these kind of cases that the public hears about, you hear them working their way up through the state and then the federal courts and finally to the Supreme Court. But in this case, these states are filing a suit against other states, and therefore I think the Constitution says the Supreme Court has the first dibs on jurisdiction without going through that other process, right?
It's really the only way.
It's the only jurisdiction.
Yeah, the other ones don't have jurisdiction. The Supreme Court has it now.
A complaint between one state and another goes directly to the Supreme Court if they accept the case.
If they accept it, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I suspect they will accept it. Some of the requests being made may go a little far for the court to agree to. For example, they want to enjoin the defendant states from certifying electors. They may, it's a number of different
most of which have already
aspects.
done so, I think, have they not?
A number of them have, right? And they're challenging this. They're basically saying that certification is illegal, and the basis for these states doing it different from previous elections is really something that's occurred over the last year or so, or less, sometimes just 6 months or less. And these were provisions pushed by Democratic Party interests and funded accordingly. Zuckerberg at Facebook funded some of the operations.
Including the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, I think they call their foundation.
Exactly.
Gave grants to
$300
all
million
sorts of county electoral, but typically only the democratically dominated counties got the grant money.
Right.
And so the Democratic attorney generals are now paying Facebook back.
Oh yeah, we're going to come to that in a minute, but don't jump ahead, because that's a whole hornet's nest in itself. But go on, David.
So the Supreme Court has asked the defendant states to reply, I think by tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
And
it's pretty amazing.
It's this is clearly a textualist dream, because if you're going to go by the actual wording and intent and meaning of the words in the document, and the meaning hasn't changed, it's pretty clear what you say, but the qualification will be those justices that are hesitant to have broad rulings that are going to jeopardize the election itself. But I do think that there are provisions in which you can pursue a number of different paths. Some of them are more clear than others, as far as being less offensive to some people.
Isn't the main job of the court to find if a violation has occurred?
Yes.
And even if they make no finding of the next step, they would still have done their job. Why don't we count the five justices and see how we think they're going to vote?
Well, I mean, if there was this ruling, the 4-4 ruling, where they sent back this case involving Pennsylvania, that was sort of a good litmus test.
Yes.
The recent Alito decision to send back this case by these two Republican legislators from Pennsylvania was sent back unanimously, but it's not really about this issue per se. So I think that's immaterial. But if they do rule that the procedure is to pick the electors, whether they're certified or not, the elections were certified or not, clearly means that they have to enjoin the existence of either the electors that would be picked. It leaves that open. And so that's the question about what would be done.
So
then.
Let's say there's a 5-4 decision in favor of halting further action by these electors. What happens next, Graham?
Well, what happens next is that although they're supposed to meet next week to register their votes,
they can still meet. They just won't have
still
everybody there.
The question is, yeah, exactly. And then what will Congress do when it's supposed to receive the votes? I think it's on January 6th. If in fact the court has ruled that some of these slates of electors are not valid, then there will be missing votes at the very least. If the states don't somehow appoint new electors, which they may well not do, there'll be missing votes, which means that probably neither candidate would have 270 counted votes, counted by Congress, in which case the election would be for the president.
Just as you described before.
Yeah, before. It goes to the House of Representatives and they choose among the highest vote getters.
Right, but it's my understanding that also, I think it's in Clause 3, it says that no senator or member of the House of Representatives can be an elector.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So that would eliminate Lynn Cheney.
You must mean Liz Cheney. You must mean Liz Cheney.
Yes.
He means Liz Cheney, right?
Right.
Right, not her mother,
No.
Lynn. But no, she would not be acting as an elector in that case. She'd be acting as a representative from Wyoming. So presumably that would be okay.
Yeah, that's right. And she could be the person to pick the elector too, right?
She could, yeah. I mean, it's complicated, but it
is
seems interesting that if it goes to the House, some writers are saying, like I mentioned last time, that it's a done deal. Trump's going to be elected by the House if the House gets the vote, just because there are more Republican delegations than Democratic. But it's not clear.
But there are these cases like Wyoming, exactly.
Wyoming, Alaska, and others where the Republican representative, one or two,
are not necessarily very pro-Trump. Right?
No, and besides which they may be reluctant to go against their perception of the popular vote, which of course has no constitutional status at all. Right. But they may be persuaded politically to make that decision. So it's not a slam dunk if it goes that way, but it won't go that way unless the Supreme Court invalidates some of these electoral decisions.
Right, and I just don't see how they can't invalidate at least part of it, because if Barrett and Alito and Thomas, at the very minimum, and perhaps Kavanaugh, are textualists, I just don't see how they can rule any other way. I can see Roberts ruling against it.
I could too.
I can see Roberts ruling
but I don't see the others.
Right.
It's very hard to see how they could have it consistent with their doctrine.
Right, exactly.
That would give us a 5-4 outcome, invalidating some of the slates of electors, which would put the Supreme Court right back smack dab in the middle of a presidential selection process.
Is it possible that they could leave Pennsylvania arguing? It's hard. It's hard for me to see how they wiggle out of having to do Pennsylvania.
Here's what I think could happen, even with the textualists, who in fact, they're most on the hook because they've already stated their philosophical principle of interpretation, which is the text. But for them, is there any other way? And here's how I could imagine another way of thinking for a textualist. It might go something like this, yes, the text of the Constitution specifies that the legislatures determine the selection process, but they already determined it. Mm-hmm. They passed laws determining how, they're going to be selected. Now, the trouble is some of their executive branches and some of their state judiciaries did not comply with their determinations. And it might be argued in the case of their executive branches of their states that there was either an explicit or an implicit prior grant of discretion in cases of exigency. Like the U.S. Congress has adopted a bunch of, has given to the executive branch at the federal level an awful lot of delegated power to the executive branch. There might well be an argument there's been a lot of explicitly or implicitly delegated power from the state legislatures to the state executives, meaning that in fact, seen in that broader sense, the legislatures did determine the way it was they were selected.
I'm sure you're echoing what the critics of the Texas suit are saying.
Oh, yeah. I'm just telling you where I think.
We should go on to another topic. We've pretty well.
Well, okay. Let's go on from that. Here, David may have one last comment, though. Do you, David?
Well, I think that the issue of the 14th Amendment in particular also is a serious one, and there are a number of different components to it, including the fact that all 4 of these states, their own state laws were broken, or were not applied across the board.
Most of it. Mm-hmm.
Right. People didn't receive equal treatment. So it's people within the states didn't get equal treatment. People comparing Pennsylvania to Texas, the people in both states are not getting equal treatment, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a very strong case to do something. And I think they will rule in some way, the question will be how to resolve the issue. We have a new election.
Right.
Will you then go the route that you're saying, Graham, where they pick the electors separately or some other way, and so on. So
Or
I
they just
I
won't be
think
picked, and it'll go to the House.
yeah, it's unclear.
Right. It's unclear.
David, to our listeners, is there any commentator that you have seen that does the best job of laying out the merits of this Texas case? Or a person on video that somebody could find?
I think Mark Levin has done a pretty good job.
He's done a pretty good job. I agree.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are others, but I think Mark's been the most prominently visible one.
Right. And you know what's weird about this is that for myself, and I assume for lots of other people, although this case initiated by Texas and joined now by other states is a very serious constitutional case, and the Supreme Court cannot ignore it. They have to do something about it one way or the other, take it or not take it. This is real stuff. But to learn about it, I find myself having to go to sort of off-brand media sites.
You don't find this on the New York Times. I got the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Orange County Register, every day. The Financial Times of London also.
Yeah.
Every day. Do I see this? No.
So I guess it's not real, but we know from the facts that it actually is real. So what's going on? Why is there kind of like a media blackout on this? It's so weird.
Unfortunately, because it's so straightforward.
Partly, but I think it's the bias, and I think it's they want a different administration. They've invested their own brand name into it. President-elect.
Right.
It seems to me that
Chris Wallace last Sunday was attacking, who was it, from the Trump administration for not referring to Biden as president-elect.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this groupthink and this bias, and I think that's the natural course of what we're seeing today. But I think that it's like the Hunter Biden scandals. It's like the video of the State Farm arena that Facebook is now censored. It's the same thing. But I think the reality of it is that there's many other places that if you want to look, you can find this information. And the polls show that most people think that the vote was defrauded. That's what the polls say.
Speaking of Hunter Biden, it's back.
Right, because he's being audited now or investigated by...
He's being investigated by the federal attorneys in Delaware.
For taxes.
Oh boy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, so back to the media thing. I mean, to me, it seems like a terrible abdication of responsibility on the part of the blue chip media because it forces people to look elsewhere. And, the trouble is when I look elsewhere, I know that some of the other sites, they have their own, they don't always have a great track record either.
Right,
yeah,
for
right.
accuracy.
So it's very difficult for the ordinary citizen to sort this out.
Yep.
Plus, you start worrying about Russian trolls and things like that. Because
sure.
But to me, it's outrageous that the video from that State Farm arena in Georgia has been taken down by Facebook. It's not that this is somehow an acting skit. This is not some
It wasn't staged
video.
No.
This is exactly what happened.
Closed circuit TV footage.
Yes.
Right. But then there were many of the mainstream media, the legacy media, have attacked the obvious sort of interpretation of what was happening.
Right. So the real question is, did the people there indicate to the outside observers, particularly obviously the Republican observers, that they were closing town?
It wasn't just that. It was independent observers and media also.
Right.
All checked out.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody leaves except the vote counters.
That's right. Well, it's just 4 vote counters.
Yeah.
But what's really sad is that you can't go and look at the video and make your own kind of judgment about the thing because YouTube is taking it down and they're deleting stuff. You can't, anything about alleging voter irregularities is being vetoed, censored, eliminated by Facebook and I guess by YouTube now, which is part of Google. What's the deal with these social media companies? Why are they taking all this stuff out of public view?
So if you put up Molly Hemingway's refutation of the taking down of the video, they put down, this is also disputed by fact checkers.
Well, the fact check firm that they used is these 2 people, both with left-wing backgrounds, called Lead Stories.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, the name of the article at the Federalist by Molly Hemingway is called "No, the Georgia Vote Counting Video was not debunked, not even close." And so she, at the very end, she says that, in a Kafkaesque twist, Facebook is now using lead stories to censor this story critical of lead stories.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what's happening.
Right. And that's exactly what's happening. And Molly just nailed it.
I just hope that competing companies come into existence.
Yeah.
And,
I think they are.
yeah.
Yeah, I
In
think
fact, there
they
was a
are, too.
report today that Newsmax just beat Fox one day
Oh my
during
gosh.
the day. As the first time ever. So, it's...
Here's a pithy little detail I found. YouTube, when it announced, I guess earlier today, that it was going to push out these kind of videos from their platform, the title of their statement was "Supporting the 2020 U.S. election." That's how they framed their censorship policy.
That's right.
Supporting the 2020 election.
All right. So let's go on to a new area.
Well, one last thing. I mean, what about this antitrust lawsuit? I mean, I was just reading about New York Attorney General Letitia James. She announced today that she's leading a group of 48 state attorneys generals in a lawsuit parallel to one from the Federal Trade Commission, seeking a breakup of Facebook under antitrust law. Wow.
Well, I think
and it's not because she's upset about this, because she's kind of a left-leaning Democrat.
I think we should let market forces take their course here, and not give them any special privileges. Take away their government, if they're getting government contracts, if they're working with NSA or something like that to monitor all of us, take that away, and just see if they can maintain this if they're alienating half the country.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think of it like the Bell telephone system,
yes,
which of course was a government monopoly.
But that was geographically.
No, I know. It was broke up geographically, which kept the monopoly geographically, but fortunately technologies overcame it.
Right.
But there was a real monopoly created by the government, and I think in this case, as you're suggesting, Bill, there are protectionist entity, subsidies and whatever, special access arrangements with the NSA and so on and so forth.
I mean, the thing is,
so I think that's the way to approach it. And I think we're already seeing a revolt and an emigration, so to speak, from some of the big social media to Parler.
So just as Drudge has been replaced by Revolver and some other things.
Yes, Citizen Free Press and whatever.
Right.
And all these. This is all it's a dynamic process.
We can all remember when Netscape was big.
Yep, that's right.
I look at this kind of situation, and when I see an antitrust lawsuit of this type, I can't help but wondering, do we really need to break up a private company? I mean, shouldn't private companies be free to make stupid decisions with regard to their own business and their own customers?
The point is they need to be accountable to customers, shareholders, employees, the people that they have contracts with.
Right.
But if they're protected from being accountable, that's when the problem comes in.
They're actually benefiting from governmental privileges, which are conferred upon them. Yep. So it's not really quite the case that these are simply private companies making stupid private decisions. They're making...
Well, let's see. We're going to learn more about it. And I think it's very ironic that Zuckerberg has been putting his hand on the scales for the Democrats, and the Democratic attorneys general are trying to hit him with a sledgehammer.
Well, he put in $350 million into this one part of the campaign. Wow. And that obviously is not a neutral party.
No, it's not enough. That's what they're telling him. It's
That's
not
right.
enough.
It could be, yeah.
We want it all.
Yes. That's
so
right.
People in the rest of the country are probably interested in what we as Californians have to say about some Californians that are entering a prospective Biden administration. Let's talk about that for a little while here. I was told, although I missed it myself, that when Joe Biden announced his choice of Javier Becerra who's currently the Secretary of State of California. He pronounced his name something more like...
He's the Attorney General of California.
Excuse me, that's right, Attorney General, yeah.
He's also a former congressman.
Correct,
Right.
yeah. I mean, he mispronounced his name, though, but here in California, we try and have the proper Spanish pronunciation. But regardless, Mr. Becerra is a pretty strong choice, strong in the sense of very vigorously asserting a kind of tilt that those of us who were worried about a Biden administration in the first place, it kind of confirms our worries.
You're right. I mean, he's a radical on abortion. Not only is he in favor of abortion at any point,
for any reason,
but he's in favor of mandating people funding abortion. California is the place where the Center for Medical Progress had been spying on essentially getting videos of executives of Planned Parenthood who were discussing their negotiations and sales of aborted fetal body parts.
Mm-hmm.
And Becerra actually started on Kamala Harris, and then Becerra came in. He continued the suits to go after the head of the Center for Medical Progress, which is a clear violation of the First and 14th Amendment. The First Amendment for two reasons. One is free speech, and the other one is religious freedom.
Yes, free press.
Free press, but also
free
religious
speech.
freedom.
That too, yeah,
Right.
that too. I mean, the argument is that they're just using, arguably, they say they're just enforcing California's video recording laws, but the way they're enforcing them, what their Kamala Harris was and Javier Becerra, also they're enforcing them with a kind of selectivity that makes it very clear that it's all about silencing disfavored political speech.
What was done is common by investigative reporters, and they've never gone after any regular investigative reporters. They just didn't like the result of this story.
Mm-hmm.
They found it too shocking. They even acknowledged that was a reason.
I always thought we're supposed to admire muckrakers, but they got...
Yeah. Even if, let's say, you have a different view of what Planned Parenthood was doing, why can't it be reported? I mean, that's very outrageous. Now, speaking of free press and this possible head of HHS, so in California, we have a law that if you're a police officer and you transgress the law, you transgress the regulations in your police department, you abuse citizens, you abuse anyone that's subject to the police, and there's a record of this. This record is supposed to become public. And Becerra blocked that, to the great upset of the news media in California. But he did it. He didn't care about the law.
No.
So he also, this is not original with him, previous people have done this, but he was also mucking with the title and content of state propositions. So we have referenda in California. It's very easy to get.
We have a lot of them and too many.
Ballot, and he interfered with the descriptions of these, so to make them seem the ones he didn't like, to make them seem unattractive to the public,
And vice versa. Right.
Yeah.
And
So
he also
he's a piece of work. I think if there's somebody that's deserving of a challenge from the U.S. Senate, I think he's certainly one of them.
Well, he's also the key guy who is fighting to enforce AB 5.
Yes.
The measure.
Actually, I have that in my notes, and I forgot. And David, you are absolutely right. He has been a terror on trying to shut down independent contractors and gig workers.
That's right. And he's also the person, one of them, but he's been outspoken in his belief that a group like Little Sisters of the Poor should be forced to provide abortion services in their
to buy
but
so
even
for
more
socialized medicine, and he wants comprehensive socialized medicine. And even if you're a poverty vowing Catholic nun who's not going to get pregnant, hey, you got to pay as if you're going to be pregnant.
Yeah. And he also was in favor of a 2015 law that was apparently, I think it was ruled unconstitutional, requiring crisis pregnancy centers to refer women to abortion clinics. Another First Amendment
Right. No,
issue.
Violation of free speech.
He favored them having to notify if you come into a private. So some pregnancy crisis centers are trying to counsel people to, have your baby. We'll try and work with an adoption agency. We'll try and, if you want to hang on to the baby, great. We're going to counsel you that way. And so that offended some people politically, that someone could have that position and offer that kind of counseling. And so they were mandating forced speech. So forced speech is definitely unconstitutional. And so they were saying, you have to say, by the way, you can get an abortion.
Right.
Even if that's what you believe that they shouldn't do.
So his support for AB 5, Assembly Bill 5, is part of his consistent support for sort of union-supported state mandates of all sorts.
Yeah.
And
I think he has to be, of all the names that have been floated by the Biden people as their nominees, this has to be one of the worst.
Yeah.
But there are some other unattractive people.
Well, there are, but I just want to point out before we go on to the others that, we're speaking as Californians here. It's not like we don't like our own. We do like our own. I admire, he has an inspiring personal story, immigrant family from Mexico, risen. And so this is no derogation of that. It's just, the trouble is, and it's
his policies and behavior.
And it's not just his opinions, it's the way he's used the law in discriminatory and unconstitutional ways that makes it a question whether he should be the chief law officer of the United States.
If only he would support the idea of being upwardly mobile and have an opportunity for people in need, and not be in favor of measures that would clamp down and destroy those choices for people.
Right. Okay. General Lloyd Austin. We should be excited about this because this would be the first African-American Secretary of Defense, I think, if he were approved. But boy, he's getting a lot of pushback on that one.
Unbelievable. Both the Los Angeles Times, also the New York Times, also an editorial in the Financial Times of London. This is kind of getting in the weeds of of U.S. politics for the Financial Times. Lots of pushback and basically along the lines of civilian control of the military. So under the National Security Act passed at the end of World War II,
1947,
because we were going to now have a very large standing army, the Congress said that you had to be a certain number of years away from being a general officer if you were going to be named to this position of Secretary of Defense. And so this was waived for General Marshall, George Marshall, and it was waived for Jim Mattis. And now a lot of people, for example, Susan Collins of Maine said, well, okay, I thought there was a particular case in the case of Donald Trump, who didn't have a lot of foreign policy experience, so I was willing to see that, Jim Mattis could help out there. But I don't see it here, and I don't want to make a habit of it, and I don't want to establish a precedent of every time we're just waiving this, and we have people from the Pentagon in charge of the Pentagon.
That's what Collins said.
Yes. She didn't quite go on as long as I did, but that was just...
But then it's not just that. We're getting pushback from people on the so-called left from his serving on the board of Raytheon and Nucor.
So both left and right are doing this thing about the civilian control of the military. It's actually quite across the board. And the only people who are defending it are really political hacks. It's actually kind of surprising. I think it's kind of heartening. For those of us who have always loved Arthur E. Church's book, Civilian and the Military.
Which we published.
Yes.
We have a new edition of it that Robert Higgs did the forward to.
It, yes. Right. So, and so I recommend that to people. Yeah. I'm even recommending it spontaneously, not remembering that you had republished it. But it's a great book. And, the Raytheon thing is being attacked from the left as that he's part of the military-industrial complex. And I think some Trumpians seem to be of the same mind, because Trump himself raised the thought that we might have a military-industrial complex pressure problem in our foreign policy.
Right. So he was became commander in Iraq.
Right.
He
the
was
whole Middle East Command. Yeah.
Right. He was also became commander, I think it was under Obama, of Central Command. And I don't think he's an ideologue.
No,
he describes himself as a loyal soldier. And I think he basically does what the Pentagon wants and what an administration wants. And I think Biden was thinking that he'd be a checkbox on identity politics,
right.
which I think what Obama and the others were doing as well. So it is. I do think it's, and so he was being presented as an alternative to Michelle Flournoy.
Right, because the left was too concerned about her military and consulting and think tank type ties.
But with her, we could have broken the glass ceiling for women.
Well,
why do we always think in these terms?
The question is, why do women want to be discredited when now they don't have to take responsibility for these stupid decisions?
You have a great sense of humor, David. I would also add that a very, very telling tape of Lloyd Austin is when he's in front of Congress and they're asking him about millions of dollars have been poured into creating an alternative guerrilla army to fight the Assad regime in Syria. And he is forced to admit that every dime was wasted. They ended up with nothing.
That's
no army, no people, nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, I have to give him credit for saying that, but, you know, he also was presiding over that. So,
well, there are other names that are floating around too. One of them is Neera Tandem, and for Director of Office of Management and Budget. And she worked with Obama and with Hillary. She's famous for her tweeting, in which she would attack other people. She's sort of a anti-Republican activist, but she also has a
she's not a unity appointment. That's what
no,
David is
she's
saying.
not a unity appointment. She attacked Biden, for example. But
no, she attacked Saunders.
She attacked Saunders, but also she said that it would be a good thing if Biden dropped out because that would help Hillary's campaign.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But the interesting thing about her is, and also she's known for, she was asked by this one reporter this question. She turns around and she punches him in the chest.
What?
And so, anyway, but the interesting question about her is whether she's so universally disliked by Republicans and Democrats, of whether she's actually being presented as sort of a sacrificial lamb.
Right. It's been suggested that she's to the gods of the transition process. They're going to send
so
her.
she's drawing away fire from Becerra.
Right.
Right. So Becerra's getting like no opposition because everybody hates her first.
It's interesting. It's interesting that Lloyd Austin is getting all this opposition, that Becerra is seeming to get a walk. By the way, Fudge has a problem. Marcia Fudge.
That's right.
Tell us.
So she stuck up for this fellow legislator who was beating his wife. And so she testified and said, you know, he's a wonderful guy and we shouldn't be doing this to him. So the guy gets out. So then he murders his wife. So that kind of was a pretty bad judgment on her part. I mean, everybody can make mistakes, but
I he was a state legislator in Ohio.
Yeah.
And so she was
a colleague.
She pushed to get leniency for him.
Right,
so he was in prison for like 8 months or something. Got out, killed his wife.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that I misspoke a few moments ago, and I was speaking about Becerra. I was he's
you meant
opposed.
HHS.
Yeah, I meant Health and Human Services, right? And so we've got a question actually from one of our participants who's following us online today, who asked this question. I guess in view of what we said about Becerra already, Becerra as head of HHS will be in charge of vaccine distribution. Will he politically skew distribution to special favor to identity politics? If so, how can this be countered? Thank you, Ron, who sent that in through our ThinkSpot interface.
The real answer is the states are going to have the final say over this. The national government is going to make recommendations. The New York Times last Sunday had a huge article about the need for racial basis of rationing of the vaccine. And the Spectator USA had an article chastising the New York Times for this. Do we need, race to be governing the vaccine distribution? The rationale that's being offered is that Latinos and blacks are suffering a lot. But it seems to me that I don't know, we could get into this whole question of whether the government is any good at picking who should get the vaccine. But anyway, they've got the vaccine, so they're going to pick it. And, the argument could even be made that young people should get it since they're probably the ones who are spreading it, right? Over 16s. But, that's politically impossible. They're going to give it to the old people and the hospital workers first. And so, that can be...
Who will have more serious reactions to it?
But the real question is, are they going to give it to blacks and Latinos because of political clout and in order to satisfy this identity politics and Black Lives Matter and so forth stuff that's going around the country and is strong in the Democratic Party? I think they're going to, if they don't do it, they're going to have to say, well, our plan does it anyway, even though it doesn't overtly do it. Right. They're going to be faced with pressure on this.
Yeah, because I think, the claim, I forget, there was a major basketball player who recently, I think it was today, announced that the healthcare system is racist against blacks. And if you don't have the kind of money that he has, you're out of luck. So I think that the view is that the medical system is systemically racist and they have to have special measures to make things equitable.
We're going to probably see that, but I think that will not be popular in general in the country.
No, I don't think so either.
It will be part of piling on of this thing that the Democrats and the progressives and the leftists are doing to themselves.
Right, and I think they're going to fight. They're going to fight with each other. Yeah. But the people who are in need are going to be hurt.
Yeah, and are not going to be happy, and their relatives are not going to be happy.
That's right.
But I think that tendency, which our participant who sent the question is, probably rightly concerned about, it may well be resisted for many political reasons, and just the awkwardness of overtly race-based allocations.
But we're seeing in Oregon passed a law setting up a subsidy for COVID damaged businesses, only black businesses.
Oh.
Only black businesses.
Yeah.
I don't see how that survives constitutional scrutiny.
Wow, no, I don't see that's not equal protection.
So there you have an example of this already going on. Oregon is, of course, one of the most liberal states in the country.
Yeah, and I think it's part of a pattern too politically that we're seeing in this election and its results. That there was no blue wave, there was at most a blue ripple running across a very strong red cross current. The Republicans got more seats in the House. They're going to probably hold the Senate. They held the state houses and governorships. There's going to be a lot of resistance to any overt action of the type that our participant was worried about. And it's probably a good thing that America's constitutional setup allows for, blocking and parrying and checking and balancing.
A related possible appointment on this issue of systemic racism is Mary Nichols, who is has been chairwoman of the California Air Resources Board, another California progressive. She is in favor of zero emissions by 2035, and for comparative purposes, in 2018 in California, electric cars made up 1% of all cars. So you can see what kind of change that would be. Especially already we have blackouts and so on and so forth. But the reason I mention this is because she believes that environmental racism is just one form of racism, and that climate action is necessary to deal with it.
Yeah, wow.
So and she is under consideration for a position, David?
To be head of EPA.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Well, let me jump half a step back to the question of, the vaccines. Hopefully they will not be distributed in some egregiously racial way. And if Becerra tries, I'm sure there's going to be pretty hardy pushback. But it brings us to the question of vaccines more generally. And if you don't mind, David, I was just thinking about the way that earlier today, you and I had a little exchange on this subject. We've been reading different articles about, when's the FDA going to approve these vaccines? When's the emergency youth authorization going to be given? The Brits already are starting to give people their vaccination shots.
It's the banner headline in many newspapers today. Britain starts vaccines.
Yeah.
So I asked,
and Fauci said, our pace, our slow, our leisurely pace in the United States with the FDA is the right pace. The Brits are not.
But then other people say, oh, well, there's a hidden risk that no one's taking seriously in this vaccine. So I said to David this morning, I can't tell whether the FDA is being too slow to approve the vaccine or too fast to approve the vaccine. And David, your response was just really perfect.
Well, their default is that slow equals safe.
Yeah.
And just from the nature of the bureaucracy itself, and also the interest groups who use the FDA, the FDA requires all sorts of testing, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to get a single drug approved.
Right.
And that means that most innovators can't afford that.
Right.
And so you have a narrowing of the firms that can compete to produce drugs, plus the fact you have the problem of so-called orphan drugs. Now, there's orphan drugs. When they do research, you find out that not only can you find medications that would help people with diabetes or heart conditions or whatever, but you find many other drugs that will not be relevant to millions of people, but maybe to just 10,000 people or 5,000 people. But because you can't afford all the testing, they never come to market. So the FDA is a logjam. There are private entities, nonprofit and for-profit. For example, there's a firm called ECRI, which does testing for medical devices. And the model is very similar to Underwriters Laboratory and other entities that certify. And when you get certified by these private firms, your insurance costs go down, your tort situation is more manageable, and the view that you should have one central planning entity like the CDC or the FDA in many of these health measures is really foolish. I mean, the CDC, if going through this COVID experience, has been wrong almost every time. And then they reverse their opinion within a week.
That's
right.
Anyway,
the FDA, we have a website called fdareview.org that goes through the history of the FDA and examines many, many things, which I recommend too. We also did a book called Hazardous to Our Health on the FDA.
Another good introduction to this topic, Dan Henninger of the Wall Street Journal did an article for the Concise Encyclopedia of Economics that you can easily find called under the tag drug lag.
Yes.
And this drug lag terminology comes from the well-known University of Chicago economist Sam Peltzman, who's, he's retired, but he is a great economist and
good friend of ours.
He studied this.
No, really,
famously.
And so the Operation Warp Speed effort was basically the White House seeing the ridiculous lags in producing things, which would not be acceptable in a private market.
They just crashed through the red tape. Some of it was subsidy, but a lot of it was crashing through the red tape.
Yeah, that's right. And these firms competing, because this is a big opportunity, right? Financial opportunity. But the key is crashing through the red tape is not a substitute for doing sound science and to check on the safety hazards of side effects. And I mean, we don't know whether these vaccines will affect the autoimmune system of elderly people, say. So we want to make sure that safety is built in, and the way to build it in is to make people accountable, not to socialize it through some agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just so accustomed to assuming that, of course, everything to do with health and safety has to be centrally determined by an agency in Washington, D.C. for all 50 states. It's almost impossible for Americans to get outside of that mindset and consider private licensing and like.
Right.
Well, for example,
I think that's a private alternative would be great. But one of the other aspects of this drug lag is here are all these drugs that are used in foreign countries and have gone through their screening process.
Yeah.
And they're not allowed in the U.S. sometimes for years and years.
Right. Now,
and yet Germany or France or Italy or Britain are using these drugs with great success for the
great success, right? But if you have a question with it, I mean, I mentioned this firm ECRI.
Right.
ECRI's been around for 50 years. They just bought the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, which is on medication safety, and there's no reason why certification of drugs that are prescribed by physicians are not approved by testing laboratories like ECRI and the others, or in hospitals, and so on and so forth, instead of being subject. The reality is these government agencies are subject to political pressure. And of course, when Trump was endorsing Operation Warp Speed, I guess it was Biden who said he wouldn't take the vaccine.
It was really Kamala Harris,
or Kamala Harris, whoever it was.
Yeah.
So they're making a judgment based on politics as opposed to the science.
Now they've flipped.
Now they've flipped, exactly. Yep.
It's amazing.
Speaking of flipping, we had this thing in California. We have we have in Los Angeles a lockdown on outdoor dining and restaurants, which came a little earlier than the statewide lockdown that just happened a couple of days ago. So we have a politician there as a former movie star. She was in Dobie Gillis, TV star, I guess is more accurate. And her name is Sheila Kuhl. And so she voted in the Board of Supervisors to, have ban outdoor dining, which of course the restaurateurs have pointed out, you have no scientific basis whatsoever for this. It's much safer to be outdoors than, anyway. So she voted for it, and then she promptly went to her local Santa Monica favorite restaurant and ate just in the manner she had declared illegal and had banned. And so, like the next night, the restaurateurs held a demonstration outside of her house, which I view as kind of ugly to do that to people's houses.
Yeah, don't go to people's houses.
Yeah, don't go to people's houses. But anyway, they did. We had that happen to us at our house, by the way. The teachers union came, hundreds of them came to our house and drew things on things and scared the neighbors. And I go on and on. It's a personal thing. But anyway, it happens. So they went to this woman's house, and the New York Times wrote about it, as well as the other papers. But the New York Times just left out the anecdote about her eating in violation right afterwards. All the news that's fit to print? I don't think so. All the news that fits your narrative, yes.
That fits your narrative, that's right. But I think that there are now so many examples of prominent political figures and the hypocrisy.
Right.
That is becoming commonplace.
They had a front cover, an entire front cover of the tabloid, the New York Post, was, rules for you, but not for me, with pictures of the people.
Right, and it's not just the hypocrisy of their, Pelosi and Cuomo, and it goes on, but it's also things like the recent news account that 8 firms that Gavin Newsom is a principal in his Plumpjack empire, received over $3 million of these PPA loans. Meanwhile, other people were not receiving it, and of course he's complaining about Trump having the policy, which I wouldn't necessarily disagree with. I think it was a poor policy, but the amount of corruption on that level, and then you see that the state of California, for example, the Employment Development Department is now been reported that $3 billion, I guess it's over $2 billion now, has been defrauded through claims by prisoners or people claiming to be prisoners, something in the neighborhood of 35,000 claims. and
So it's
other
also
people
out of state people.
out of state. Absolutely, that's
So
right.
they had no real check
No,
on who the
no,
people were and what their
no.
status was, and so it just became a scam, a racket.
A total scam.
Unbelievable,
Right.
unbelievable, expensive incompetence.
So we did we have a program quarterly called the California Golden Fleece Award, and the most recent award went to the California IT systems in all these departments, including EDD, motor vehicles, you name it. And the amount of money that these agencies have wasted on programs, billions, and then it never works, and then they cancel the program over and over again. The computer systems don't talk, financial systems don't talk to each other. I mean, it's just a gigantic mess.
Right.
And it shows again why central government planning is inept and creates disincentives for people to, again, be accountable, to find innovative ways to get the job done. And of course, all of this is happening in the state where Silicon Valley and IT
Right.
is centered.
And so it's a one-party Democratic state. That's another
Right.
pretty important.
And so many of the heads of the top firms in Silicon Valley who are doing all these great innovations and would not put up with such shenanigans are supporting the people who are doing it.
So it's
Right?
interesting that
This is-
independent institutes' work in this area has really been recognized, because I was seeing that KTVU, Channel 2 in San Francisco, Oakland, did an interview with Adam Summers, who is the Independent Institute's expert on these IT systems in California. And I thought that was well-deserved to have that interview about this EDD unemployment fraud.
Well, EDD is now getting known for
Yeah.
being sort of crime, fraud, corruption central.
Right. So we now have in California, we have this unemployment scam. We have the hypocrisy of political leaders. So that includes the mayor of San Francisco also going to the French Laundry, and it was this Gavin Newsom going to the French Laundry and eating indoors with a large group, and it includes Sheila Kuhl, and there's others. And then we have the wildfires not being mastered. This is another thing the Independent Institute's done quite a bit of work on. And, it's starting to add up that we have a serious problem of incompetence, and hypocrisy in California politics.
And these things get people thinking in new ways. And,
Right.
we can just hope that, especially here in California, where the obvious downsides of some of these centralizing tendencies are seen, that people can rethink it.
Right. The shutdowns are really driving people
Right.
nuts. And
Did you see
the
this
school
thing where-
shutdowns? The latest thing, I'm not sure if you saw this, was because of the enormous backlash against Newsom about shutting down the playgrounds. He just reversed on that, and now he's going to let the playgrounds be open.
Oh, that's good. They're out.
It is
there.
good.
Did you see this? Did you see this thing
And I was
just
just
came
saying,
out
people are getting fed up.
Right.
earlier today? There's this article about how the San Mateo County Chief Health Officer, Scott Morrow, who was really enthusiastic about the lockdowns back in the spring, now has all sorts of misgivings, and he's resisting Governor Newsom's kind of comprehensive lockdown approach to the pandemic risks, taking a risk himself by not getting with the centralized program. Good job, Scott Morrow, for independent thinking.
Virtually all the sheriffs in Southern California
Yes.
have said they will not enforce this.
Right. Exactly.
Wow, that's
and
incredible.
there's one, I forget which firm, I think it's in Southern California, restaurant, has declared itself an autonomous zone.
Oak and Coal,
That's
in
right.
Los Angeles.
That's it. Autonomous zone. And so how do progressives deal with that? By the way, one other little sort of twist on the issue of identity politics and people sort of getting fed up. This one woman I mentioned, Mary Nichols, is being considered to be the EPA head. As I mentioned, believes in environmental racism, and she wants to change climate policy based on that. But one of the things that happened was she was going around basically trying to cash in on the George Floyd death as an example of environmental racism. So the California Democratic Assemblyman Jim Cooper, who's black, has called Nichols shameless to exploit the George Floyd death to advance what he called her crooked environmental policies.
Oof. Wow. I can't fail to make mention of this comment. I just got it from one of our participants who's on with us, I think probably through ThinkSpot, who says, I don't know about this myself, but perhaps this person is from New York State, who says, ironically, Cornell University is intending to make the flu vaccine mandatory except for students of color. Hard to believe. Okay.
I mean, they could reverse it. They could. But only students of color get it.
We're coming into the home stretch here, or the landing, really. But, you know, I don't want to close our conversation today without asking one or both of you to make some observations about the loss that we have suffered in this last week. We lost Walter Williams, who was a friend to the Independent Institute and an intellectual statesman for the United States. David, did you know Walter Williams?
Yes, I did. He was one of our founding members of our board of advisors. He spoke here. He was always, I mean, he's an example of someone who is a friend to everybody, and was a stellar example of integrity. He was a great writer. He was clear. He would not compromise, but he was very gracious in communicating with people. And you know, he touched the lives of a lot of people. Millions of people, quite frankly.
And Bill Evers, what did he believe in? What were his principles?
Well, he believed in justice meant you have your property justly earned, you make your voluntary transactions, and if somebody takes that, that's not justice. So don't tell me that's social justice. He wrote brilliantly about youth and minority unemployment caused by the minimum wage. He wrote a brilliant book on South Africa and how the apartheid system was anti-capitalist, was instituted by the labor unions, and was meant to restrict the rising of blacks economically. He wrote brilliantly, an early book was called The State Against Blacks, about all the regulations against opportunity for blacks to rise in the United States. And
it's made into a PBS documentary.
There's a PBS documentary about him that's quite good. And he also had a series. The main thing is he was a clear writer, he was a clear speaker, he substituted on the Rush Limbaugh show. But, you know, he was kind of a great guy. He was very vibrant when he talked. He's a very tall guy. He would stand up and he would kind of radiate in the room.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he was tall, so you couldn't miss him.
Very tall.
Yeah, right.
And so he was kind of commanding presence, but a good-natured commanding presence.
Yes, right.
And so I think he was a wonderful contribution in his life, and we will all miss him.
We will miss him, yeah. May
and
he rest in peace.
And his wife were a really lovely couple.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Thank you, David. Thank you, Bill. What a discussion. We could go on for a long time. Just kind of here in closing, I want to mention that those who have joined us in this conversation can, go deeper if you want. For example, David Theroux mentioned already our website, fdareview.org. You can read up on the FDA. We have a really interesting article right now on the top of our Catalyst website about FDA dragging its feet on vaccine approval and the need for reciprocity and vaccine approval with other countries. That's at catalyst.independent.org. More generally, you can always go to independent.org and find a whole bunch of resources for you on our website on virtually every subject, including the one that David also mentioned, our California Golden Fleece Award, which report connected to which gives all the details about the state failed IT enterprise here in California, and so much more. So
we don't want people, either in California or around the country, to think that California is in perpetuity going to be exporting bad ideas with people. The point I think that we're trying to make is bad ideas cannot be sustained, and a lot of this nonsense is catching up with these people. So that's the good news. And I think Walter was mentioned. Walter Williams is a good example. Walter was a sole voice for many years, but his influence spread, and he's influenced many younger people.
I have a bibliography, a reading list on race and civil rights that's on the Independent website, and it has several articles and books by Walter Williams listed on it, along with a lot of other people, if you're interested in the topic of race and economics.
So thank you both, gentlemen, for your wisdom, for your contributions. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for this conversation. Please visit our website, independent.org. We also give our thanks to our partner organization, ThinkSpot, who makes us available to all sorts of people through their vast network here and around the world. So from the Independent Institute here in Oakland, California, thanks for joining us for Independent Outlook, and join us, I think, 2 weeks from now for more conversation. Take care.
And I don't think we're going to be here in 2 weeks, but I do want to wish everyone
You're right.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy New Year.
For sure. See you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Grant.
Bye-bye.